Welcome to Metaphysical Soul Speak. I'm your host, Elena Fox Starks. Hey guys, I hope that whenever and wherever you are, when you hear this recording, that you are doing well. In spite of the moon being in Pisces, which makes us all a little bit moody. I know for me, I've been a little bit moody. I got a little upset yesterday at somebody, and it lasted like just a couple minutes, and then I was fine, back to normal, but it happens. It happens with the moon in Pisces. Sometimes it's stuff that's been building up a long time, and then you finally decide to say something. Or sometimes you just feel a little melancholy during the moon in Pisces. And yesterday, of course, being the harvest moon and a full moon, and obviously that's what the harvest moon is, full moon, and Friday the 13th, there's that added sort of energy for some people. I mean, for me, it's always been kind of a good luck day, but I don't know. I've been a little bit on edge for 2 days. I've been also overwhelmed and bombarded with all of the cosmic energy. I mean, my God, are you guys aware of how much energy has been absolutely flooding in? We are 99 on the Ascension Symptom Scale. 99. I mean, we're getting just flooded with so much energy. My son is one to wake up early in the morning and bound out of bed. He gets dressed and he's lovely. He's just like, yeah, and he goes about his day, and he's been in bed past noon for 2 or 3 days, because that's what the energy has been for everybody. And he's like, Mom, it's like the ascension energy is overwhelming me. I'm like, I know, I feel it too. It's kind of crazy, right? So wherever and whenever you are listening to this, I'm hoping that you are able to just give yourself a little space, give yourself a little grace, give yourself and others the room that they need and the room that you need to breathe, right? I'm looking out the window here in my bedroom. I started walking around. You probably could tell the acoustics changed in the background, but my God, it's so beautiful out. There's a light cloud cover, and the full moon is shining in the clouds. So take a moment to look at things like this and notice your surroundings and be grateful for where you are in your life now. So another thing I wanted to bring up to you guys is that the day before yesterday, no, it actually was, it was yesterday. I'm like, when was it? Yeah, yesterday there was this beautiful golden energy that came right through the sun. And it was incredible. And it felt like an energy that was holy. It had the energy of a holy light coming down. And I asked Divine about it, and the answer I got about this holy light is that it is here to bathe our chakras, especially our heart and throat, third eye, crown, and especially our star chakra, all of those. So from the star chakra, like the 4th chakra through the 8th chakra. And it's meant to clear out, well, if you want to call it the cobwebs, it's meant to clear out the cobwebs of the remnants of anything that you haven't quite cleared yet, so that you can have a higher mind And so this energy had a definite energy of the higher mind situation. Today I noticed the energy in the sky was like a blue, and I looked up at the clouds, and instead of them being normally white and gray, again they were blue, but 3 or 4 different shades of blue, like incredible blue. And have you ever seen all of the nautical colors when people live at the ocean? Like if you think Nantucket or the East Coast in the States, if you've ever seen a TV show from there, and someone's house is decorated in like 3 or 4 different kinds of blue, that's the colors of the sky. It was just absolutely beautiful, like the smoky blues and the bright blues and the very clear, very pale blues, and then fluffy white clouds on top of that. And then later, in the late afternoon, there was a pink energy. It felt very much like the Mother Mary pink, like on the 8th that we had, where it was, again, to kind of cuddle and embrace us like a mother would love a small child. It was that kind of energy. And I felt all of those today. So we felt gold again today, but not like yesterday. And I feel like we're being given the opportunity to feel the love from the higher, our higher selves and divine. But while we're being given that energy, we're also going through the remnants of stuff from the past. And so we've got to be aware of that, especially the moon in Pisces. Moon in Pisces is always that energy of trying to get rid of stuff from the past. But overall today, there has been kind of and yesterday, a lot of anxiety-ridden sort of energy, a lot of unsettled emotions. And so if you're going through it, it might be ascension, might not just be how you're feeling. You might be affected by your environment, by the Schumann Resonance, by the wave after wave after wave of cosmic radiation slamming into Earth from the sun. We were hit with a major solar flare today, massive solar flare, according to Why So Serious 24D channel on YouTube. Sarah O'Brien, she's always on top of what's going on with the sun. I mean, she's like scouring the NOAA weather alerts and the sun reports from NASA, etc. So I don't know, I've been feeling again with the melancholy energy has come back. It's like a higher octave of it though. Before it felt like it was in my stomach and solar plexus and lower heart energies, and now I feel it in the higher heart energies. I feel that those of us that have been through a love situation where we loved the pure and unconditional heart, and then we were hurt when the one we loved decided to either leave or cheat or suddenly flip and become a different person that we didn't expect. The moment you find out you're dating a narcissist and you're like, oh, I loved them for nothing because they can't even love. So if you've ever been hurt after loving somebody unconditionally, then that's being brought up right now to heal. We're not being punished. Hey, remember that time that where you were down and all these people kicked you around? Well, we're going to do it again, buddy. Yeah, it's not the universe doesn't do that, but the universe will gently remind you and bring it back up. A couple days ago, there was more energies that were doing something similar, and it had been stuff that I had already healed in me, and I literally felt great. I didn't have any issue with that energy. It was like 2 or 3 days ago. And I saw other people were talking about it, and they're like, oh, it's been so horrible, it's been so bad, I have all this issues and stuff from the past coming up. And I realized that the same will be for you as well, is that if we have already cleared everything that affects that particular chakra, it's not going to be an issue for us when that energy comes back around. So there's that. I found out last night that my best friend of 33 years, Amber, who was dying of brain cancer, actually did die. I found out that she died 3.5 weeks ago, and nobody bothered to tell me. I had to actually ask her husband. I mean, he knew I was one of her best friends. She had a lot of good friends, a lot of people she hung out with, obviously more than me now that I moved to Ecuador. But back in the day, we were inseparable. I mean, like, we were spending 12-hour days together. I spent more time with her than the boyfriend I lived with. You know, it's just because we were in school. We were in every class. You know, our last year together in school, we literally made it a point to have every single class together. You know, actually for about 1.5 years we did that. We're like, how can we adjust it so that we're in the same exact class every stupid time? Like, just... you know, and then she'd bring her coffee thermos full of Irish whiskey and coffee, and we'd be getting drunk in class like all the time. It was ridiculous. Completely fun, completely ridiculous, but we did it. We both got really, really good grades because we're constantly staying together. And over the years, she got to know my kids, and she became like a grandmother for my kids. And you know, we've always kept in touch. And, you know, just a couple weeks before she died, I found out that she finally, and she'd been keeping it from me, that she had lung cancer, had a whole lung removed because she had been a heavy smoker and a heavy drinker. So don't do that, especially don't smoke. Smoking's bad for you. Smoke weed. No vaping anymore either. It's just too many stories coming out. I even have a vape pen of my own. My son has a vape pen. You know, we used to love it. We'd be like, let's be douchebags today. And we'd go out and vape in public, and we'd laugh our asses off because we thought it was hilarious because people look like douchebags when they vape. That was our assessment of it. And it was super fun. And I'm so freaking glad nothing bad happened to us. But we would do it for like a day, and then we'd be like, I'm bored with it. And then we put it away for a month and go, hey, let's get out the vape pens again. But now I'm 100% rethinking all of that because, you know, obviously we never ever did it with nicotine. You know, we just did it with the flavors because it was fun to have, like, you're sucking in flavors and it's almost like eating candy, but there's no calories. And so that was why we kind of liked it. But I'm glad that we're over and done with all of it now that we know the truth about it. But, yeah, I don't know, man, so she died 3.5 weeks ago, and she came to me though about a week ago, and that was what was so weird, is that she'd gone through so much crap that I felt like she's just going to go into the cocooning stage right away. When you go through a lot of physical ailments in a row, and you finally lose the fight to like cancer, you tend to you go say hi to everybody for like a day or something when you hit heaven. And then after that, there's like a clinic there, and you go and you lay down, and people stand around you, and they give you, I guess, the equivalent of Reiki energy, but they give you light and healing energy, and you go to sleep. Some people sleep for 2 or 3 years after they die. So if you ever try to hold a seance for your great aunt Edna and she never came to you, and you feel slighted, don't, because she's probably being cocooned, especially if she had a really hard life, if she had a really traumatic life and she was just done with Earth. And I asked my higher guidance, I'm like, why did Amber come to me like a week later, or 2 weeks after she died? Like, that's crazy. It didn't make any sense to me. And he said, well, you know how she is. She's super social. And so she went around. She had to go hang out with her mother who had died. She took care of her mother. And she wanted to see her mother. She actually was hanging out with my ex-husband, who met her at the gate, he told me. And I guess she just was hanging out with like all of her friends that had passed before her. she had a boyfriend that she was madly in love with and wanted to marry him, and absolutely just thought for sure he's the one. And she watched as he slowly drank himself to death, and then he died, and of alcohol poisoning, and I think liver damage. And so I'm sure she went to go see him. All the people that she knew in life, you know, she had a ton of friends. She was a very social butterfly person. And so apparently God told me she's not going to be cocooned for a while. She's hang out with her friends, and then she'll eventually go into the clinic and do that. I'm all, oh, okay. I never thought about that. People who are maybe more introverted probably just go cocoon right away, and people that were extroverted possibly, you know, stay awake a little bit more, a little longer. So weird, right? So that's what happened. My friend did die, and I had to find out about it 3.5 weeks later after I asked. You know, I thought someone would tell me, but I guess her son was with her when she died. She wasn't alone. That was a good thing, and it was her son that I had dated for a long time back in college. We kept it from her because we didn't want her to have expectations and high hopes, and she was always kind of trying to throw us together. Like, you know, when he had girlfriends that she didn't like, she'd be like, oh, Michael, why don't you come over? And then next thing you know, I'm invited too. And she always kept trying to play matchmaker, and I adored him, and I would have stayed with him forever because I loved him so much. But I guess I wasn't his type or something. Like, we did date for a while and loved each other, had a great time together, but for whatever reason, I think I wasn't what he was looking for, and he always ended up with super muscular blonde women that are like sporty, and, you know, people that like want to play tennis for a living. I don't know. It was just my impression of the women he picked. Like, they were always like sporty and wearing guys' clothes, and like with the what is those things that go across your forehead to keep the sweat off from the 70s? I don't know if any of his women ever wore that, but that was when I think about the women he dated. I imagine they had those weird little wrist cuffs that keep sweat off their hands. And the things are on their forehead. That was my impression of all of his women. They were all like that. You know, I just always felt like that was his deal. But and I was kind of sporty myself. I mean, I rode my bike everywhere I went. I rode my bike 150 miles a week. I worked out 4 hours a day. I did aerobics about 4 times a week for 1 hour to 2 hours every time. So I was no slouch, but for whatever reason, he didn't want me in that way. And so we ended up being really good friends for many years. And so I'm glad that he was with her because they were very close, and that's a cool thing. So anyway, I don't know. Everyone dies, I guess. No one gets out of here alive, man. And so many people are leaving the planet, and it's just pretty weird. It's pretty weird to see it. Pretty weird to see it as it's happening, and so rapidly. And so many of my friends died that were really too young to die, like 25 years old, 30 years old. Like, it's not like, you know, I know when you get older and then all your friends are older, or if you make friends with a bunch of people that were a lot older than you. I mean, Amber's only 16 years older than me. She had her child when she was 16. And had given up her child for adoption. They got back in touch, so they repaired that relationship. So she did everything she came to do, and that was cool. You know, there's sometimes we finish what we're doing, and then we're like, okay, I'm ready to go now. Screw it. Screw this. Below in this popsicle stand, baby. You know, I've asked God, and I'm like, hey, you know, I know, like, if I'm not together with my twin by the time I'm 78, I'm going to go. So y'all got me for another 27 years of doing this. I was thinking maybe in a few years, maybe y'all like pass the torch to somebody else and retire. But Art Bell's spirit came to me like a week ago, and he's like, no, you're never going to stop, because if you know you love it so much, and if you stop, you're going to regret it. And I don't want you to do what I did, and I don't want you to make that mistake. Like, he regrets completely ever getting out of the game. Ever stopping the radio show. Like, he was just like, no, And so I'm like, all right, that's cool. But if I'm not in love by the time I'm 78 years old, I'm just going to leave because I'm just tired of not being with my twin flame, And even though I say that, there's a lot of men that have asked me, hey, don't you want to? It's like, no, I don't want a random relationship. I've been working my butt off towards the goal of being with my one true love, and I'm ready, and I'm ready for him. Other people I'm not ready for. I'm not ready to start a new karmic thing. Ugh, gives me the energy of like, I want to just go vomit now. It's like when the wrong person asks me out, I just feel like I need you to stop talking to me, maybe forever. And it's like the idea of having another karmic thing where I'm going to be stuck on the birth and death reincarnation wheel cycle. That energy just makes me sick to my stomach. I don't know if you guys are at that level yet or not, but if you think about coming here again and again and again to keep working this crap out, doesn't it make you sick? It makes me absolutely, completely sick. I mean, I'm done with all of my karmic relationships and I'm not looking to get into a new one. I mean, you end up hurting another person. If you're with them long enough, you're going to end up hurting their feelings. They're going to hurt your feelings. They'll hold themselves back in one way or another, and then they'll regret you and, or have regrets about it later. And then bada boom, bada bing, stuck back on that karmic hamster wheel. No, thank you. I'm like, hell no. That's not something I want to do ever again. I want to meet my twin, and when you're with your twin, you don't accrue karma because you are that person. That person is you more than anybody else is you. So kind of looking forward to meeting my twin and just being all, hey, and taking it slow and getting to know each other again and learning about each other's energy and habits and dreams and hopes and fears and all that stuff. And I look forward to all of it, but I also look forward to going on dates and, I don't know. I don't care if it's parachuting or hot air balloon or riding horses, sailing around islands, whatever it is. I cannot wait to do all of that fun stuff. But I don't know. I've had way too many older, fatter, not attractive men say, but you need a man. It's like, oh my God, how heteronormative, cisgendered can you be? Maybe I need a woman. Hell, I don't know. But it's just been so irritating with that. It's like, no, actually I don't. I don't need a man, especially when the man is you, because you're not my man. I know you're not my guy. I know who my guy is. I have had dreams, and I've seen his face now. And what's hilarious is I had a dream that was Ashton Kutcher. I know for a fact it's not Ashton Kutcher, but oh my God, it was the best dream ever. I had this dream that he was lying about his name, and he kept putting fuzzy pictures up, but I could tell he was a good looking guy. And we were like on a dating site, and he's like very married. I know he, in a million years, in reality world, he would never do this, but we were talking. He said his name was Michael. Oh my God, Michael from that 70s show. But he didn't say Michael, or he didn't say that. He just said, my name's Michael. And so we talked for 6 months, and we got to know each other, and we had like so much stuff in common, except he didn't tell me, oh, by the way, I'm a famous actor. I think he told me he is a writer, producer, actor, but he didn't really say really who he is. And he shows up, and since I have face amnesia, I'm all, oh, you're so good looking. Why didn't you put a more clear picture on your profile? He's like, I don't know. I just wanted to get to know somebody on a heart level first. I'm like, awesome. So we started dating, and he came down to Ecuador to stay with me for like a week so we could get to know each other in person to see if we really wanted to move forward. And then after like a couple days, it took me to go, wait a minute, Michael, your name isn't Michael, you're Ashton Kutcher. And he's like, hi, got it. He's like, what took you so long? He's like, oh my God. He's like, I've been dying for you to recognize me. I'm like, yeah, but I don't like recognize anybody hardly. I can meet somebody and see them the very next day, and I don't freaking remember them. Yay for face amnesia. And I've had this problem my whole life, and it makes me come across as like a really mean person, but I'm not mean. I just don't remember people's faces. unless someone has something super, super interesting. Like Jamie Farr, his big nose, I could see his face right now. If I saw him tomorrow, I would know that's Jamie Farr. You know, it's just when someone has something really outstanding about their face, then it's like, oh yeah, I totally know you. But I've met famous people and not recognized them, except for Scott Baio, because he's gorgeous, and I remembered him. So we had this wonderful talk, and, you know, I kind of, you know, I'm not going to get into it, but I really liked him. He was just one of the sweetest people in the world that anyone can meet. But anyway, we're going to get into it now. Schumann Resonance News, disclosurenews.it. The activity, even if it was light to moderate, continues incessantly. As in the last 3 days, it's been a constant oscillation on the 10 to 15 hertz range with sporadic, more significant movements. Today, the relevant part goes from 10 to 16 UTC time, with the series of spikes, the highest of which reached 34 hertz at 1430. So I don't know what happened other than I don't think they listened to my show, but last night sometime they changed where it said 9/12/2130. They changed it to 9/13. They actually used the date 13, and then they put 1700 report. But it's pretty much what I had read to you already. So very weird, right? I don't know. I guess they realized their mistake. But if you guys are listening to me, I wanted to say hey to disclosurenews.it. I love your website. So I don't know if they heard me or not, so just in case. I mean, seriously, I kind of feel like they've never heard of me, but that was pretty cool. All right, now I'm waiting for the heartmath.org. I had the website completely queued up, but something happens where it just becomes a blank page because I'm using Firefox. I'm like Foxfire? No, Firefox. All right, here we go. Now we've got it going here. So at midnight California time, they were at 106 hertz frequency. I don't know if it's California time. I think I just misspoke there, but what I mean is midnight, whenever HeartMath deems midnight to be. It might be UTC time, I'm not sure. But in midnight in California, they were at 106. They went down only to 104 by 4 a.m. In Hafuf, Saudi Arabia, they started off at 21 hertz frequency and went down to absolute zero at 4 a.m. Lithuania started off at 155 hertz frequency at midnight, and they went down to 153 4 hours later. Excuse me. And Alberta, Canada, 220 hertz frequency on the Schumann Resonance scale at midnight, and by 4 a.m. they were down to 211. So at midnight in Northland, New Zealand, they started off at 89 hertz frequency. They went down to 82 by 4 a.m. And as always, lately, Hulului, South Africa, is just a flat line at 0. That's it. Unbelievable, right? I think someone needs to call them and go, hey guys, your machine's not working. I think an elephant stepped on it. I'm just kidding. There's no elephants in South Africa, I don't think. I think they're only like in Kenya. And the Ivory Coast. Anyway, I don't know. I think elephants are only in parts of the whole continent of Africa, but in South Africa, I don't think they have animals like that because they're too far south, I think. Just like in South America, you know, people think South America, and you think from the beginning to the tip of South America, it's 100% jungle and filled with animals and birds and stuff, and it's not really. I mean, most of it is just mountainous regions and cold. It's pretty cold here. You wouldn't imagine that. You hear South America, you think it's hot. And it gets up to 70 degrees. Lately, this past week, it was 70 degrees. At least where I live. It's hardly anything. It never, ever really gets all that hot here. It's the perfect temperature in Cuenca. At the coast, oh my God, they get very hot. It's like 80, 85 over there with humidity. Guayaquil is just, it's like the Arizona of Ecuador. It gets like really hot over there, like unbearably hot. All right, so lesson 96 in A Course in Miracles today is salvation comes from my one self. And the word self is with a capital S. Salvation comes from my one self. So let's see here. What does it say? This is a really big lesson. So I encourage you, if you're interested, go check it out. After you read it, it says basically spend 5 minutes a day thinking about this. Salvation comes from my one self. Its thoughts are mine to use. So it's interesting, right? Okay, although you're one self, you experience yourself as two, both good and evil, loving and hating, mind and body. This sense of being split into opposites induces feelings of acute and constant conflict, and it leads to frantic attempts to reconcile the contradictory aspects of this self-perception. You have sought many such solutions, and none of them has worked. The opposites you see in you will never be compatible, but one exists. The fact is that truth and illusion cannot be reconciled, no matter how hard you try, which means you use and where you see the problem must be accepted if you would be saved. Until you have accepted this, you will attempt an endless list of goals you cannot reach. A senseless series of expenditures of time and effort, hopefulness and doubt, and each one is as futile as the one before, failing as the next one surely will. Problems that have no meaning cannot be resolved within the framework they're set. Two selves in conflict could not be resolved. Good and evil have no meeting place. Anyway, it goes on, and if you're interested, acim.org, or you could just download A Course in Miracles app, and they're all free. So some are red, some are blue, some are purple, some are pink. Just pick your favorite color and go with it. And the lessons are always free, of course. So lesson 96 idea today is salvation comes from my one self. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we are going to go over the second and last half of Acres of Diamonds, what we started last week. I can't wait to see the rest of the story. I haven't read this all the way through. I'm so excited about it. I can't believe I didn't sneak peek it either. It's like I've had it up as one of my tabs on my browser this whole week, and I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to read it, but I'm going to read it to you guys, and we're going to learn about it together just in one moment right after this. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's high time you did. It is the absolute easiest way to make a podcast. First of all, it's absolutely free. Second of all, they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. You guys have known that I've been doing this for 8 months using the Anchor.fm app right on my cell phone, and I have done it everywhere, right? I have recorded this in my living room, my bedroom, little cafes in Quito, Ecuador, all over Cuenca. It's so absolutely easy to make your podcast, and editing is just a snap. Anchor also will distribute your podcast for you, and it took me about 2.5 months to become syndicated, and now I'm available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more, and so can you. You can make money from your podcast also, and there's no minimum requirement. You get paid from your very first listener. It is everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. So please, if you are interested in making a podcast of your very own, do not hesitate to start with Anchor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Do you ever wish you could look into the next chapter in your book of life and see what's coming next? What does the universe have in store for you? I can help you with that. I will give you a Celtic cross reading, which is 10 cards, or you can ask me 3 questions, and I use 3 cards per question. So that's 9 cards, or I can channel your higher guidance, or maybe God directly for you. Maybe you want to talk to your dear departed Aunt Edna, because maybe you have a few questions and she was the smartest person you knew. If your deceased relatives are available or your ascended masters, I can channel them for you personally. Let me have 1 hour to show you the future in your next chapter of your book of life. Readings are $75, and it takes me an hour to an hour and a half to complete. And for this price, you will also be hooked up to the healing grid around the planet for free, which means yours truly, me, I will be giving you Reiki 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the rest of your life. All you have to do is let me know. metaphysicalsoulspeak@gmail.com, and we will explore your future together. All right, guys, this is the second half of Acres of Diamonds by Russel H. Conwell. As you recall, this is a lecture that is more than 104 years old. It is in the public domain. I found it on Gutenberg.org, where you can find many wonderful books from the days of yore, Y-O-R-E. Don't get to use that word very often. As you recall, we were just at the point of the lecture where he was talking about how people get it wrong when they read the Bible, and the quote is not "money is the root of all evil." The quote is "the love of money is the root of all evil." And it kind of reminds us that we need to love people and have money, not love money and have people. Food for thought. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start reading where we left off last week. I think I will leave that behind me now and answer the question of nearly all of you who are asking, is there opportunity to get rich in Philadelphia? Well, now, how simple a thing it is to see where it is, and the instant you see where it is yours. Some old gentleman gets up back there and says, "Mr. Conwell, have you lived in Philadelphia for 31 years and don't know that the time has gone by when you can make anything in the city?" "No, I don't think it is." "Yes, it is. I have tried it." "Well, what business are you in?" "I kept a store here for 20 years and never made over $1,000 in the whole 20 years. "Well, then, you can measure the good you have been to the city by what this city has paid you." Because a man can judge very well what he is worth by what he receives. That is, in what he is to the world at this time. If you have not made over $1,000 in 20 years in Philadelphia, it would have been better for Philadelphia if they had kicked you out of the city 19 years and 9 months ago. A man has no right to keep a store in Philadelphia 20 years and not make at least $500,000, even though it will be a corner grocery uptown. You say, "You cannot make $5,000 in a store now." Oh, my friends, if you will just take only 4 blocks around you and find out what the people want and what you ought to supply and set them down with your pencil and figure up the profits you would make if you did supply them, you would very soon see it. There is wealth right within the sound of your voice. Someone says, "You don't know anything about business. A preacher never knows a thing about business." Well, then, I will have to prove that I am an expert. I don't like to do this, but I have to do it because my testimony will not be taken if I am not an expert. My father kept a country store, and if there is any place under the stars where a man gets all sorts of experience in every kind of mercantile transactions, it is in the country store. I'm not proud of my experience, but sometimes when my father was away, he would leave me in charge of the store. Though fortunately for him, that was not very often. But this did occur many times, friends. A man would come into the store and say to me, "Do you keep jackknives?" "No, we don't keep jackknives." And I went off whistling a tune. What do I care about that man anyhow? Then another farmer would come in and say, "Do you keep jackknives?" "No, we don't keep jackknives." Then I went away and whistled another tune. Then a third man came right in the same door and said, "Do you keep jackknives?" "No, why is everyone around here asking for jackknives? Do you suppose we are keeping the store to supply the whole neighborhood with jackknives? Do you carry on your store like that in Philadelphia?" The difficulty was I had not then learned that the foundation of godliness and the foundation principle of success in business are both the same precisely. The man who says, "I cannot carry my religion into business," advertises himself either as being an imbecile in business or on the road to bankruptcy, or a thief, one of the three, sure. He will fail within a very few years. He certainly will if he doesn't carry his religion into his business. If I had been carrying on my father's store on a Christian plan, godly plan, I would have had a jackknife for the third man when he called for it. Then I would have actually done him a kindness, and I would have received a reward myself, which it would have been my duty to take. Now, there are some over-pious Christian people who think if you take any profit on anything you sell, that you are an unrighteous man. On the contrary, you would be a criminal to sell goods for less than they cost. You have no right to do that. You cannot trust a man with your money who cannot take care of his own. You cannot trust a man in your family that is not true to his own wife. You cannot trust a man in the world that does not begin with his own heart, his own character, and his own life. It would have been my duty to have furnished a jackknife to the third man or the second, and to have sold it to him and actually profited myself. I have no more right to sell goods without making a profit on them than I have to overcharge him dishonestly beyond what they're worth. But I should so sell each bill of goods that the person to whom I sell shall make as much as I make. To live and let live is the principle of the gospel and the principle of everyday common sense. Oh, young man, hear me. Live as you go along. Do not wait until you have reached my years before you begin to enjoy anything of this life. If I have the millions back, or 50 cents of it, which I have tried to earn in these years, it would not do me anything like the good that it does me now in this almost sacred presence tonight. Oh yes, I am paid over and over 100-fold tonight for dividing, as I have tried to do in some measure as I went along through the years. I ought not speak that way, it sounds egotistic, but I am old enough now to be excused for that. I should have helped my fellow man, which I have tried to do, and everyone should try to do, and get the happiness of it. The man who goes home with the sense that he has stolen $1 that day, that he has robbed a man of what was his honest due, is not going to sweet rest. He arises tired in the morning and goes with an unclean conscience to his work the next day. He is not a successful man at all, although he may have laid up millions. But the man who has gone through his life dividing always with his fellow men, making and demanding his own rights and his own profits, and giving to every other man his rights and profits, lives every day. And not only that, but it is the royal road to great wealth. The history of the thousands of millionaires shows that to be the case. The man over there who said he could not make anything in a store in Philadelphia has been carrying on his store on the wrong principle. Suppose I go into your store tomorrow morning and ask, do you know a neighbor A who lives 1 square away at house number 1240? Oh, yes, I have met him. He deals here at the corner store. Where did he come from? I don't know. How many does he have in his family? I don't know. What ticket does he vote? I don't know. What church does he go to? I don't know and I don't care. What are you asking all these questions for? If you had a store in Philadelphia, would you answer me like that? If so, then you are conducting your business just as I carried on my father's business in Worthington, Massachusetts. You don't know where your neighbor came from when he moved to Philadelphia, and you don't care. If you had cared, you would be a rich man now. If you had cared enough about him to take an interest in his affairs to find out what he needed, you would have been rich. But you go through the world saying, no opportunity to get rich. And there is the fault right at your door. But another young man gets up over there and he says, I cannot take up the mercantile business. While I am talking of the trade, it applies to every occupation. Why can't you go into the mercantile business? Because I haven't any capital. Oh, the weak and dudeish creature that can't see over its collar. It makes a person weak to see these little dudes standing around the corners and saying, oh, if I had plenty of capital, how rich would I get? Young man, do you think you are not going to get rich on capital? I'm sorry. Young man, do you think you are going to get rich on capital? Certainly. Well, I say certainly not. If your mother has plenty of money and she will set you up in business, you will set her up in business, supplying you with capital. The moment a young man or woman gets more money than he or she has grown to by practical experience, that moment he has gotten a curse. It is no help to a young man or woman to inherit money. It is no help to your children to leave them money, but if you leave them education, if you leave them Christian and noble character, if you leave them a wide circle of friends, if you leave them an honorable name, it is far better than that they should have money. It would be worse for them, worse for the nation, should they have any money at all. Oh, young man, if you have inherited money, don't regard it as a help. It will curse you through your years and deprive you of the very best things of human life. There is no class of people to be pitied so much as the inexperienced sons and daughters of the rich of our generation. I pity the rich man's son. He can never know the best things in life. One of the best things in our life is when a young man has earned his own living. And when he becomes engaged to some lovely young woman and makes up his mind to have a home of his own, then with that same love comes also that divine inspiration toward better things, and he begins to save his money. He begins to leave off his bad habits and put money in the bank. When he has a few $100s, he goes out into the suburbs to look for a home. He goes to the savings bank, perhaps, for half of the value, and then goes for his wife. And when he takes his bride over the threshold of that door for the first time, he says in words of eloquence my voice can never touch, I have earned this home myself. It is all mine, and I divide it with ye. That is the grandest moment a human heart may ever know. But a rich man's son can never know that. He takes his bride into a finer mansion, it may be, but he is obliged to go all the way through it and say to his wife, my mother gave me that, my mother gave me that, my mother gave me this, until his wife wishes she had married his mother. I pity the rich man's son. The statistics of Massachusetts showed that not one rich man's son out of 17 ever dies rich. I pity the rich man's sons unless they have the good sense of the elder Vanderbilt, which sometimes happens. He went to his father and said, did you earn all your money? I did, son. I began to work on a ferry boat for 25 cents a day. Then, said his son, I will have none of your money. And he too tried to get employment on a ferry boat that Saturday night. He could not get one there, but he did get a place for $3 a week. Of course, if a rich man's son will do that, he will get the discipline of a poor boy that is worth more than a university education to any man. He would then be able to take care of his millions of his father. But as a rule, the rich men will not let their sons do the very thing that made them great. As a rule, the rich man will not allow his son to work, and his mother? Why, she would think it was a social disgrace if her poor, weak, little, lily-fingered, sissy sort of a boy had to earn his living with honest toil. I have no pity for such rich men's sons. I remember one at Niagara Falls. I think I remember one a great deal nearer. I think there are gentlemen present who were at a great banquet, and I beg pardon of his friends. At a banquet here in Philadelphia, there sat beside me a kind-hearted young man, and he said, Mr. Conwell, you have been sick for 2 or 3 years. When you go out, take my limousine, and it will take you up to your house on Broad Street. I thanked him very much, and perhaps I ought not mention the incident in this way, but I follow the facts. I got onto the seat with the driver of that limousine outside, and when we were going up, I asked the driver, how much did this limousine cost? $6,800, and he had to pay the duty on it. Well, I said, does the owner of this machine ever even drive it himself? At that, the chauffeur laughed so heartily that he lost control of his machine. He was so surprised at the question that he ran it up onto the sidewalk and around a corner lamppost out into the street again. And when he got out into the street, he laughed till the whole machine trembled. He said, he'd drive this machine. Oh, he would be lucky if he knew enough to get out when we get there. I must tell you about a rich man's son at Niagara Falls. I came in from the lecture to the hotel, and as I approached the desk of the clerk there stood a millionaire's son from New York. He was an indescribable specimen of anthropologic potency. He had a skull cap on one side of his head with a gold tassel on the top of it and a gold-headed cane under his arm with more in it than in his head. It is a very difficult thing to describe that young man. He wore an eyeglass that he could not see through, patent leather boots that he could not walk in, and pants that he couldn't even sit down in. He was dressed like a grasshopper. This human cricket came up to the clerk's desk just as I entered, adjusting his unseeing eyeglass, and spake in this wise to the clerk. You see, he thought it was Hinglish, you know, to lisp. Sir, will you have the kindness to supply me with some papa and envelopes? The hotel clerk measured that man quickly, and he pulled the envelopes and paper out of a drawer, threw them across the counter towards the young man, and then turned away to his books. Oh, you should have seen that young man with those envelopes came across that counter. He swelled up like a gobbler turkey, adjusting his unseeing eyeglass, and yelled, "Come right back here. Now, sir, will you order a servant to take that papa and envelopes to yonder desk?" Oh, the poor, miserable, contemptible American monkey. He could not carry paper and envelopes 20 feet. I suppose he could not get his arms down to do it. I have no pity for such travesties upon human nature. If you have not capital, young man, I'm glad of it. What you need is common sense, not copper cents. The best thing I can do is to illustrate by actual facts well known to you all. A.T. Stewart, a poor boy in New York, had $1.50 to begin life on. He lost 87.5 cents of that on the very first venture. How fortunate that young man who loses the first time he gambles. That boy said, I will never gamble again in business. And he never did. How came he to lose 87.5 cents? You probably all know the story how he lost it, because he bought some needles, threads, buttons to sell, which people did not want, and had them left on his hands, a dead loss. Said the boy, I will not lose any more money in that way. Then he went around first to the doors and asked the people, well, what did they want? Then when he had found out what they wanted, he invested 62.5 cents to supply a known demand. Study it wherever you choose, in business or in your profession, in your housekeeping, whatever your life. That one thing is the secret of success. You must first know the demand. You must first know what people need, and then invest yourself where you are most needed. A.T. Stewart went on that principle until he was worth what amounted afterwards to $40 million. Owning the very store in which Mr. Wanamaker carries on his great work in New York. His fortune was made by his losing something, which taught him the great lesson that he must only invest himself or his money in something that people need. When will you salesmen learn it? When will you manufacturers learn that you must know the changing needs of humanity if you would succeed in life? Apply yourselves, all you Christian people, as manufacturers or merchants or workmen to supply that human need. It is a great principle, as broad as humanity and as deep as the scripture itself. The best illustration I ever heard was of John Jacob Astor. You know that he made the money of the Astor family when he lived in New York. He came across the sea in debt for his fare. But that poor boy with nothing in his pocket made the fortune of the Astor family on one principle. Some young man here tonight will say, well, they could make those fortunes over in New York, but they couldn't do it in Philadelphia. My friends, did you ever read that wonderful book of Rees? His memory is sweet to us because of his recent death, wherein is given his statistical account of the records taken in 1889 of 107 millionaires of New York. If you read the account, you will see that out of 107 millionaires, only 7 made their money in New York. Out of the 107 millionaires worth $10 million in real estate then, 67 of them made their money in towns of less than 3,500 inhabitants. The richest man in this country today, if you read the real estate values, has never moved away from a town of 3,500 inhabitants. It makes not so much a difference where you are as who you are. But if you cannot get rich in Philadelphia, you certainly cannot do it in New York. Now, John Jacob Astor illustrated what can be done anywhere. He had a mortgage once on a millinery stone, and they could not sell bonnets enough to pay the interest on his money. So he foreclosed that mortgage, took possession of the store, and went into partnership with the very same people in the same store with the same capital. He did not give them $1 of capital. They had to sell goods. They had to sell goods to get any money. Then he left them alone in the store just as they had been before, and he went out and he sat down on a bench in the park in the shade. What was John Jacob Astor doing out there and in partnership with people who had failed on his own hands? He had the most important and, to my mind, the most pleasant part of that partnership on his hands. For as John Jacob Astor sat on that bench, he was watching the ladies as they went by. And where is the man who would not get rich at that business? As he sat on the bench, if a lady passed him with her shoulders back and head up and looked straight to the front, as if she did not care if all the world did gaze on her, then he studied her bonnet. And by the time it was out of sight, he knew the shape of the frame, the color of the trimmings, and the crinklings in the feather. I sometimes try to describe a bonnet, but not always. I would not try to describe a modern bonnet. Where is the man that could describe one? This aggregation of all sorts of driftwood stuck on the back of the head or the side of the neck like a rooster with only one tail feather left. But in John Jacob Astor's day, there was some art in the millinery business, and he went to the millinery store and said to them, "Now put into the show window just such a bonnet as I described to you, because I've already seen a lady who likes such a bonnet. Don't make up any more until I come back." Then he went out and sat down again, and another lady passed him in a different form, of different complexion, the different shape and color of bonnet. "Now," said he, "put such a bonnet as that in the show window." He did not fill his show window uptown with a lot of hats and bonnets to drive people away, and then sit on the back stairs and bawl because people went to Wanamaker's to trade. He did not have a hat or a bonnet in that show window, but what some lady liked before it was made up. The tide of custom began immediately to turn in, and that has been the foundation of the greatest store in New York in that line, and still exists as one of 3 stores. Its fortune was made by John Jacob Astor after they had failed in business, not by giving them any more money, but by finding out what the ladies liked for bonnets before they wasted any material in making them up. I tell you, if a man could foresee the millinery business, he could foresee anything under heaven. Suppose I were to go through this audience tonight and ask you, in this great manufacturing city, if there are not opportunities to get rich in manufacturing. "Oh, yes," says some young man. "There are opportunities here still if you build with some trust, and if you have $2 or $3 million to begin with as capital." Young man, the history of the breaking up of the trusts by that attack upon quote-unquote big business is only illustrating what is now the opportunity of the smaller man. The time never came in the history of the world when you could get rich so quickly manufacturing without capital as you can now. But you will say, "You cannot do anything of the kind. You cannot start without capital." Young man, let me illustrate for a moment. I must do it. It is my duty to every young man and woman, because we are all going into business very soon on the same plan. Young man, remember, if you know what people need, you have gotten more knowledge of a fortune than any amount of capital can give you. There was a poor man out of work living in Hingham, Massachusetts. He lounged around the house until one day his wife told him to get out and work. And as he lived in Massachusetts, he obeyed his wife. He went out and sat down on the shore of the bay, whittled a soaked shingle into a wooden chain. His children that evening quarreled over it, and he whittled the second one to keep peace. While he was whittling the second one, a neighbor came in and said, "Why don't you whittle toys and sell them? You could make money at that." "Oh," he said, "I would not know what to make." "Why don't you ask your own children right here in your own house what to make?" "What is the use of trying that?" said the carpenter. "My children are different from other people's children." I used to see people like that when I taught school. But he acted upon the hint, and the next morning, when Mary came down the stairway, he asked, "What do you want for a toy?" She began to tell him that she would like a doll's bed, a doll's washstand, a doll's carriage, a little doll's umbrella, and went on with a list of things that would take him a lifetime to supply. So, consulting his own children in his own house, he took the firewood, for he had no money to buy lumber, and whittled those strong unpainted Hingham toys that were for so many years known all over the world. That man began to make those toys for his own children. Then he made copies and sold them through the boot and shoe store next door. He began to make a little money and then a little more. And Mr. Lawson, in his frenzied finance, says that man is the richest man in old Massachusetts, and I think it is the truth. So I'm sorry, I'll read that again. Mr. Lawson this is a publication back in the day. Mr. Lawson in Frenzied Finance said that man is the richest man in old Massachusetts, and I think it is the truth. And that man is worth $100 million today, and has been only 34 years making it on that one principle, that one must judge that what his own children like at home, other people's children would like in their homes too. To judge the human heart by itself, by one's children, or by one's wife, it is the royal road to success in manufacturing. Oh, but you say, didn't he have any capital? Yes, a penknife. But I don't know that he had paid for that. I spoke thus to an audience in New Britain, Connecticut, and a lady 4 seats back went home and tried to take off her collar, and the collar button stuck in the buttonhole. She threw it out and said, "I'm going to get up something better than that to put on collars." Her husband said, "After what Conwell said tonight, you see there is a need of an improved collar fastener that is easier to handle. There is a human need, and there's a great fortune. Now then, get up a collar button and get rich." He made fun of her and consequently made fun of me, and that is one of the saddest things which comes over me like a deep cloud of midnight sometimes. Although I have worked so hard for more than half a century, yet how little I have ever really done. Notwithstanding the greatness and handsomeness of your compliment tonight, I do not believe that there's 1 in 10 of you that is going to make $1 million because you are here tonight. But it is not my fault, it is yours. I say that sincerely. What is the use of my talking if people never do what I advise them to do? When her husband ridiculed her, she made up her mind she would make a better collar button. And when a woman makes up her mind, she will. And does not say anything about it, she does it. It was that New England woman who invented the snap button, which you can find anywhere now. It was the first a collar button with a spring cap attached to the outer side. Any of you who wear modern waterproofs know the button that simply pushes together, and when you unbutton it, you simply pull it apart. That is the button to which I refer, and which she invented. Now afterward, she invented several other buttons and then invested in more, and she was taken into partnership with great factories. Now that woman goes over the sea every summer in her private steamship. Yes, and takes her husband with her. If her husband were to die, she would have enough money left enough now to buy a foreign duke or count or some such title as that at the latest quotations. Now, what is the lesson in that incident? It's this. I told her then, though I did not know her, what I say now to you. Your wealth is too near to you. You are looking right over it. And she had to look over it because it was right under her chin. I have read in the newspaper that a woman never invented anything. Well, that newspaper ought to begin again. Of course, I do not refer to gossip. I refer to machines. And if I did, I might better include the men. That newspaper could never appear if women had not invented something. Friends, think. Ye women, think. You say you cannot make a fortune because you are in some laundry or running a sewing machine. It may be, or walking before some loom. Yet you can be a millionaire if you will but follow this almost infallible direction. When you say a woman doesn't invent anything, I ask, who invented the jacquard loom that wove every stitch you wear? Mrs. Jacquard. The printer's roller, the printing press were invented by farmers' wives. Who invented the cotton gin of the South that enriched our country so amazingly? Mrs. General Green invented the cotton gin and showed the idea to Mr. Whitney, and he, like a man, seized it. Who was it that invented the sewing machine? If I would go to school tomorrow and ask your children, they would say, Elias Howe. He was in the Civil War with me, and often in my tent, and I often heard him say that he worked 14 years to get up that sewing machine. But his wife made up her mind one day that they would starve to death if there wasn't something or other invented pretty soon. And so in 2 hours, she invented the sewing machine. Of course, he took out the patent in his name. Men always do that. Who was it that invented the mower and the reaper? According to Mr. McCormick's confidential communication, so recently published, it was a West Virginia woman who, after his father and he had failed altogether in making a reaper and gave it up, took a lot of shears and nailed them together on the edge of a board with one shaft of each pair loose, and then wired them so that when she pulled the wire one way, it closed them. When she pulled the wire the other way, it opened them. And there she had the principle of a mowing machine. If you look at a mowing machine, you will see it is nothing but a lot of shears. If a woman can invent a mowing machine, if a woman can invent a jacquard loom, if a woman can invent a cotton gin, if a woman can invent a trolley switch, as she did and made trolleys possible, if a woman can invent, as Mr. Carnegie said, the great iron squeezers that laid the foundation of all the steel millions of the United States, quote unquote, we men, can invent anything under the stars. I say that for the encouragement of the men. Who are the great inventors of this world? Again, this lesson comes before us. The great inventor sits next to you, or you are the person yourself. Oh, but you would say, I have never invented anything in my life. Neither did the great inventors until they discovered one great secret. Do you think it is a man with a head like a bushel measure or the man like a stroke of lightning? It's neither. The really great man is a plain, straightforward, everyday, common sense man. You would not dream that he was a great inventor if you did not see something he had actually done. His neighbors do not regard him so great. You never see anything great over your back fence. You say there is no greatness among your neighbors. It is all the way off somewhere else. Their greatness is ever so simple, so plain, so earnest, so practical, that the neighbors and friends never recognize it. True greatness is often unrecognized, that is sure. You do not know anything about the greatest men and women. I went out to write the life of General Garfield, and a neighbor Knowing I was in a hurry, and as there was a crowd around the front door, took me around to General Garfield's back door and shouted, "Jim! Jim!" And very soon Jim came to the door and let me in, and I wrote the biography of one of the grandest men of the nation. And yet he was just the same old Jim to his neighbor. If you know a great man in Philadelphia and you should meet him tomorrow, you would say, "How are you, Sam?" "Good morning, Jim." Of course you would. That is just what you would do. One of my soldiers in the Civil War had been sentenced to death, and I went up to the White House in Washington, sent there for the first time in my life to see the president. I went into the waiting room and I sat down with a lot of others on the benches, and the secretary asked one after another to tell him what they wanted. After the secretary had been through the line, he went in and then came back to the door and he motioned for me. I went up to that anteroom and the secretary said, "That is the president's door right over there. Just rap on it and go right on in." I was never so taken aback, my friends, in all my life, never. The secretary himself made it worse for me because he had told me how to go in and then went out another door to the left and shut that. There I was in the hallway by myself before the President of the United States of America's door. I had been on the fields of battle where the shells did sometimes shriek and the bullets did sometimes hit me. But I always wanted to run. I have no sympathy with the old man who says I would just as soon march up to the cannon's mouth as eat my dinner. I have no faith in a man who doesn't know enough to be afraid when he's being shot at. Oh, I never was so afraid when the shells came around us at Antietam as I was when I went into that room that day. But I finally mustered the courage. I don't know how I ever did, and at arm's length tapped on the door. The man inside did not help me at all, but yelled out, "Come in and sit down." Well, I went in and sat down on the edge of a chair. I wished I were in Europe. And the man at the table did not look up. He was one of the world's greatest men and was made great by one single rule. Oh, that all the young people in Philadelphia were before me now, and I could say just this one thing, and that they would remember it. I would give a lifetime for the effect it would have on our city and our civilization. Abraham Lincoln's principle for greatness can be adopted by nearly all. This was his rule. Whatsoever he had to do at all, he put his whole mind into it and held it all there until that was all done. That makes men great almost anywhere. He stuck to those papers at that table and he did not look up at me, and I sat there trembling. Finally, when he had put the string around his papers, he pushed them over to one side and he looked over to me, and a smile came over his worn face. He said, "I am a very busy man and only have a few minutes to spare. Now tell me in the fewest words what it is you want." I began to tell him and mentioned the case, and he said, "I have heard all about it, and you do not need to say any more. Mr. Stanton was talking to me only a few days ago about that. You can go to the hotel and rest assured that the president never did sign an order to shoot a boy under 20 years of age and never will. You can say that to his mother anyhow." Then he said to me, "How is it going in the field?" And I said, "We sometimes get discouraged." And he said, "It is all right. We are going to win out now. We are getting very near the light. No man ought to wish to be President of the United States, and I will be glad when I get through. Then Tad and I are going out to Springfield, Illinois. I bought a farm out there, and I don't care if I again earn Only 25 cents a day. Tad has a mule team and we're going to plant onions. Then he asked me, were you brought up on a farm? I said, yes, in the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts. He then threw his leg over the corner of the big chair and he said, I have heard many a time ever since I was young that up there in those hills you have to sharpen the noses of the sheep in order to get down to the grass between the rocks. He was so familiar, so everyday, so farmer-like that I felt right at home with him at once. He then took a hold of another roll of paper and he looked up at me and said, good morning. I took the hint then and I got up and I went out. After I had gotten out, I could not realize that I had seen the President of the United States at all. But a few days later, when still in the city, I saw the crowd pass through the East Room by the coffin of Abraham Lincoln. And when I looked at the upturned face of the murdered president, I felt then that the man I had seen such a short time before, who's so simple a man, so plain a man, was one of the greatest men that God ever raised up to lead a nation on to ultimate liberty. Yet he was only old Abe to his neighbors. When they had the second funeral, I was invited among others and went out to see that same coffin put back in the tomb at Springfield. Around the tomb stood Lincoln's old neighbors, to whom he was just old Abe. Of course, that is all they would say. Did you ever see a man who struts around altogether too large to notice an ordinary working mechanic? Do you think he is great? He's nothing but a puffed up balloon, held down by his big feet. There is no greatness there. Who are the great men and women? My attention was called the other day to the history of a very little thing that made the fortune of a very poor man. It was an awful thing, and yet because of that experience, he, not a great inventor or genius, invented the pin that is now called the safety pin. And out of that safety pin made the fortune of one of the great aristocratic families of this nation. A poor man in Massachusetts who had worked in the nail works was injured at 38, and he could earn but little money. He was employed in the office to rub out the marks on the bills made by pencil memorandums, and he used a rubber until his hands grew tired. He then tied a piece of rubber on the end of a stick and worked it like a plane. His little girl came and said, "Why, you have a patent, haven't you?" The father said afterwards, "My daughter told me when I took that stick and put the rubber on the end that there was a patent, and that was the first thought of that." He went to Boston and applied for his patent, and every one of you that has a rubber-tipped pencil in your pocket is now paying tribute to the millionaire. No capital, not a penny did he invest in it. All was income all the way up into the millions. But let me hasten to one other greater thought. Show me the great men and women who live in Philadelphia. A gentleman over there will get up and say, "We don't have any great men in Philadelphia. They don't live here. They live away, far off in Rome or St. Petersburg, London or Manayunk, or anywhere else but here in our town." I have come now to the apex of my thought. I have come now to the heart of the whole matter and the center of my struggle. Why isn't Philadelphia a greater city in its greater wealth? Why does New York excel Philadelphia? People say, well, because of her harbor. Why do many other cities of the United States get ahead of Philadelphia now? There's only one answer, and that is because our own people talk down to their own city. They talk down their own city. If there ever was a community on earth that has to be forced ahead, it is the city of Philadelphia. If we are to have a boulevard, talk it down. If we're going to have better schools, talk them down. If you wish to have wise legislation, talk it down. Talk all the proposed improvements down. That is the only great wrong that I can lay at the feet of the magnificent Philadelphia that has been so universally kind to me. I say it is time we turn around in our city and begin to talk up the things that are in our city and begin to set them before the world as the people of Chicago, New York, St. Louis, and San Francisco do. Oh, if we only could get that spirit out among our people, that we can do things in Philadelphia and do them well. Arise, ye millions of Philadelphians, trust in God and man, and believe in the great opportunities that are right here, not over in New York or Boston, but here for business, for everything that is worth living for on earth. There was never an opportunity greater. Let us talk up our own city. But there are two other young men here tonight, and that is all I will venture to say because it's too late. One over there gets up and says, there is going to be a great man in Philadelphia, but never was one. Oh, is that so? When are you going to be great? When I'm elected to some political office? Young man, won't you learn a lesson in the primary politics that it is a prima facie evidence of littleness to hold office under our form of government? Great men get into office sometimes, but what this country needs is men that will do what we tell them to do. This nation where the people rule is governed by the people, for the people. And so long as it is, then the office holder is but the servant of the people. And the Bible says the servant cannot be greater than the master. The Bible says he that is sent cannot be greater than him who sent him. The people rule, or should rule, and if they do, we do not need the greater men in office. If the great men in America took our offices, we would change to an empire in the next 10 years. I know of a great many young women now that women's suffrage is coming who say, I'm going to be president of the United States someday. I believe in women's suffrage, and there is no doubt but what it is coming, and I'm getting out of the way. Anyhow, I may want an office by and by myself. But if the ambition for an office influences the women in their desire to vote, I want to say right here what I say to the young men, that if you only get the privilege of casting one vote, you don't get anything that is worthwhile. Unless you can control more than one vote, you will be unknown, and your influence so dissipated as practically not to be felt. This country is not run by votes. Do you think it is? It's governed by influence. It is governed by the ambitions and the enterprises which control votes. The young woman that thinks she is going to vote for the sake of holding an office is making an awful blunder. That other young man gets up and says, there are going to be great men in this country and in Philadelphia. Is that so? When? When there comes a great war, when we get into difficulty through watchful waiting in Mexico, when we get into war with England over some frivolous deed, or with Japan or China or New Jersey or some distant country, then I will march up to the cannon's mouth. I will sweep up among the glistening bayonets. I will leap into the arena and tear down the flag and bear it away in triumph. I will come home with stars on my shoulder and hold every office in the gift of the nation, and I will be great. No, you won't. You think you're going to be made great by an office, but remember, that if you're not great before you get the office, you won't be great when you secure it. It will only be a burlesque in that shape. We had a peace jubilee here after the Spanish War. Out west, they don't believe this because they said Philadelphia would not have heard of any Spanish War until 50 years hence. Some of you saw the procession go up Broad Street. I was away, but the family wrote to me that the tally-ho coach with Lieutenant Hobson, upon it stopped right at the front door, and people shouted, "Hooray for Hobson!" And if I had been there, I would have yelled it too, because he deserves much more of his country than he has ever received. But suppose I go into school and say, "Who sunk the Merrimac at Santiago?" And if the boys answer me, "Hobson," they will still tell me 7/8 of a lie. There were 7 other heroes on that steamer, and they, by virtue of their position, were continually exposed to the Spanish fire, while Hobson, as an officer, might reasonably be behind the smokestack. You've gathered in this house your most intelligent people, and yet perhaps not one here can name the other 7 men. We ought not to so teach history. We ought to teach that, however humble a man's station may be, if he does his full duty in that place, he is just as much entitled to the American people's honor as is the king upon his throne. But we do not so teach. We are now teaching everywhere that the generals do all the fighting. I remember that after the war, I went down to see General Robert E. Lee, that magnificent Christian gentleman of whom both North and South are proud as one of our great Americans. The general told me about his servant Rastus, who was an enlisted colored soldier. He called him one day to make fun of him and said, "Rastus, I hear that all the rest of your company are killed. Why are you not killed?" Rastus winked at him and said, "'Cause when there's any fighting going on, I stay back with the generals." I remember another illustration. I would leave it out, but for the fact that when you go to the library to read this lecture, you will find that this has been printed up for 25 years. I shut my eyes, shut them close, and lo, I see the faces of my youth. Yes, they sometimes say to me, "Your hair is not white. You are working day and night without seeming ever to stop. You can't be old." But when I shut my eyes, like any other man of my years, oh, then come trooping back the faces of the loved and lost of long ago. And I know, whatever men may say, it is evening time. I shut my eyes now and look back to my native town in Massachusetts, and I see the cattle show ground on the mountaintop. I can see the horse sheds there. I can see the Congregational Church, see the town hall and mountaineers' cottages, see a great assembly of people turning out, dressed resplendently, and I could see flags flying and handkerchiefs waving and hear bands playing. I can see that company of soldiers that had re-enlisted marching up on that cattle show ground. I was but a boy, but I was captain of that company and puffed out with pride. A cambric needle would have burst me all to pieces. Then I thought it was the greatest event that ever came to man on earth. If you have ever thought you would like to be a king or queen, you go and be received by the mayor. The bands played and all the people returned out to receive us. I marched up that common so proud at the head of my troops, and we turned down into a town hall. Then they seated my soldiers down the center aisle, and I sat down on the front seat. A great assembly of people, 100 or 2, came in to fill the town hall so that they stood up all around. Then the town officers came in and formed a half circle. The mayor of the town sat in the middle of the platform. He was a man who had never held office before, but he was a good man, and his friends have told me that I might use this without giving them offense. He was a good man, but he thought an office made a man great. He came up and took a seat adjusted his powerful spectacles, and looked around. When he suddenly spied me sitting there in the front seat, he came right forward on the platform and invited me up to sit with the town officers. No town officer ever took any notice of me before I went to war, except to advise a teacher to thrash me. And now I was invited up to the stand with the town officers. Oh my! The town mayor! He was then the emperor, the king of our day and our time. And as I came up on the platform, they gave me a chair, about this far, I would say, from the front. When I got seated, the chairman of the selectmen arose and came forward to the table, and we all supposed he would introduce a congregational minister who was the only orator in town, and that he would give the oration to the returning soldiers. But friends, you should have seen the surprise which ran over the audience when they discovered that the old fellow was going to deliver that speech himself. He had never made a speech in his life, but he fell into the same error that hundreds of other men have fallen into. It seems so strange that a man won't learn he must speak his piece as a boy, as if he intends to be an orator when he is grown. But he seems to think all he has to do is hold office to be a great orator. So he came up to the front and brought with him a speech which he had learned by heart walking up and down in the pasture where he had frightened the cattle. He brought the manuscript with him and spread it out on a table just so as to be sure he might see it. He adjusted his spectacles and leaned over it for a moment, and marched back on that platform and then came forward like this, tramp, tramp, tramp. He must have studied the subject a great deal when you come to think of it, because he assumed the elocutionary attitude. He rested heavily upon his left heel, threw back his shoulders, slightly advanced the right foot, opened the organs of speech, and advanced his right foot at an angle of 45. As he stood in that elocutionary attitude, friends, this is just the way that speech went. Some people say to me, "Don't you exaggerate. That would be impossible." But I am here for the lesson and not for the story, and this is the way it went. Fellow citizens. As soon as he heard his voice, his fingers began to go like that. His knees began to shake, and then he trembled all over. He choked and swallowed and came around to the table to look at the manuscript. Then he gathered himself up with clenched fists, and he came back. Fellow citizens, we are fellow citizens. We are very happy. We are very happy to welcome back to the native town these soldiers who have fought and bled and come back again to their native town. We are especially pleased to see with us today this young hero, that meant me, this young hero who in imagination, friends, remember he said that. If he had not said in imagination, I would not be egotistical enough to refer to it all. This young hero who in imagination we have seen leading his troops on to the deadly breach. We have seen his shining. We have seen his shining sword flashing in the sunlight as he shouted to his troops, "Come on!" Oh, dear. How little that good man knew about war. If he had known anything about war at all, he ought to have known what any of my GAR comrades here tonight will tell you is true. That it is next to a crime for an officer of infantry ever in time of danger to go ahead of his men. I, with my shining sword flashing in the sunlight, shouting at my troops, "Come on." I never did it. Do you suppose I would get in front of my men to be shot in front by the enemy and in back by my own men? That is no place for an officer. The place for the officer in actual battle is behind the line. How often as a staff officer I rode down the line when our men were suddenly called to the line of battle and the rebel yells were coming out of the woods and shouted, "Officers to the rear! Officers to the rear!" Then every officer gets behind the line of private soldiers, and the higher the officer's rank, the farther behind he goes, not because he's any less brave, but because that is the laws of war require that. And yet he shouted, "I with my shining sword." I saw in that house there sat the company of my soldiers who had carried that boy across to the Carolina rivers that he might not wet his feet. Some of them had gone far out to get a pig or a chicken. Some of them had gone to death under the shell-swept pines in the mountains of Tennessee. Yet in the good man's speech, they were scarcely known. He did refer to them, but only incidentally. The hero of the hour was this boy. Did the nation owe him anything? No. Nothing then and nothing now. Why was he the hero? Simply because that man fell into that same human error, that this boy was great because he was an officer, and these were only private soldiers. Oh, I learned the lesson that I will never forget so long as the tongue of the bell of time continues to swing for me. Greatness consists not in the holding of some future office, but really consists in doing great deeds with little means, and the accomplishment of vast purposes from the private ranks of life. To be great at all, one must be great here, now, in Philadelphia. He who can give to this city better streets and better sidewalks, better schools and more colleges, more happiness and more civilization, more of God, he will be great anywhere. Let every man or woman here, if you never hear me again, remember this, that if you wish to be great at all, you must begin where you are and what you are in Philadelphia now. He that can give to his city any blessing, he who can be a good citizen while he lives here, he that can make better homes, he that can be a blessing whether he works in the shop or sits behind the counter or keeps house, whatever be his life, he who would be great anywhere must be first great in his own Philadelphia. And there you have it, guys. That is the end. It says here, though, the transcriber's note says, at the bottom of page 3 in the original, it says, "This is the most recent complete form of the lecture. It happened to be delivered in Philadelphia, Dr. Conwell's home city. When he says right here in Philadelphia, he means the home city, town, or village of every reader of this book, just as he would use the name of it if delivering the lecture there, instead of doing it through the pages which follow." And there it is. That is the end of the Project Gutenberg ebook of Acres of Diamonds. Now, just as a couple notes, for the record, personally, I do not believe that General E. Lee was Robert E. Lee was a good man, particularly for what he was fighting for. So the opinions expressed in the body of this work don't necessarily reflect my own. And I'm frankly glad that they are now taking down the statues of Robert E. Lee, for the record. So, there's that. I do like the little bit of feminism that was contained in the speech. And there's a lot of lessons. If you look past some of the language and some of the stuff is weird, like millinery, like, I don't know, have you guys ever even come across a place where they make hats in the United States still? Now, here in Ecuador, where I live, we are known I'm not Ecuadorian yet, but ojalá one day, inshallah, I will be. We are known for the Panama hats. They're called Panama hats because when the United States workers came down to help the Panamanians make the Panama Canal, the Panamanians had the good sense to go all the way to Ecuador to buy their hats. Because not only are they nice and stylish, but they kept the sun off their faces while they worked near the water. And just because it happened to be in Panama, that's how the name Panama hat came about. But these are hats that have been made here long, hundreds of years in Ecuador. And it's the one kind of hat that you see it and you're like, oh yeah, everybody looks good in this hat. That's why it's so popular. Even though he was talking about good Christian people and, everything about Christianity, because he was a Christian and a preacher. He was a Christian minister. I think that this same thing applies for every good person, regardless of religion, Muslim, Jew, whatever. So, when you listen to this, just make sure you kind of take it with a grain of salt and apply it to your own situation. You could be a good witch and still apply these principles. It doesn't matter what your religion is. If you believe in divine, if you don't, you're not listening to the show. I'm sure there's not a whole lot of, atheists listening to the show. But if you are an atheist, that's okay too. I welcome everybody listening to my show. And I thank everybody that listens to the show for sure. But, so those are just some of my notes regarding what I read tonight. Just, take it with a grain of salt. It made me cry during the Abraham Lincoln part. So I was realizing that might have been around the time that Abraham Lincoln was shot when this guy was younger. And when he said he was in the office of the President of the United States, I started doing the math quickly in my head as I was reading, and I'm like, okay, so this was written 100 years ago, and this guy might be in his 60s, so that might have been, 40 years before. And I started doing the math, and I'm like, oh my God. That was not that long ago that all of that took place. It's not as long ago as I have come to believe. And it really hit me in a hard way. I had no idea that this guy knew the President of the United States, let alone that president being Abraham Lincoln. So pretty interesting, and made me cry when the president was saying that he wanted to be an onion field farmer when he retired. And he doesn't care if he made 25 cents a day after that. What a humble man he was, right? That really blew my mind. Probably out of the whole thing, all the people that, in the beginning from last week, all the stories of the people who were sitting on top of riches and had the ability to find the riches, but they didn't want to look where they were born or where they lived. They didn't believe it. And that's true. No matter where you are, you can get rich. You could get whatever it is that you need. And you could apply these metaphysical principles to anything, not just money, not just career. Apply it to love, apply it to everything. Bloom where you're planted. Like, you're going to find what you need where you are, for the most part, or God will bring it to you where you are. I keep telling myself that my twin flame is going to end up here. Maybe not forever, but maybe he'll come on a vacation and we'll meet. I don't know. It's all pretty crazy, but it's crazy how things work out, honestly. But anyway, this Acres of Diamond, this is a law of attraction style lecture, and it is very famous, especially back in the day. It was very famous. The author of this actually created the university called Temple University. So if you've ever heard of Temple University, this man who wrote Acres of Diamonds, he's the person who started that university, Russel Conwell. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the reading of Acres of Diamonds. Next Saturday, I'll come back and we'll try to read something more. I'm going to see if I can't get a guest speaker who is a poet, and if he can't do it this week, then I'll come back with another law of attraction book, because these are very, very interesting, and you might not have time to look for them online and research, let alone read them. And I think it's important, whether you're talking about money or whatever you want to attract to you. It doesn't always have to be about just cold hard cash. It could be about bringing the house of your dreams to you, the man of your dreams, woman of your dreams, etc. And by the way, did you notice all of his cisgendered heteronormative language in this speech? Men and women, women and men. Never men and men or women and women. It was practically unheard of 104 years ago. I know gay people existed, and I know that transgender people existed, but 104 years ago, people couldn't even get the operations. So thank you, God, that people can be who they truly are nowadays. All right. Tomorrow, I'm going to come back with all new, original, and unique programming, just like always. I think we're going to talk about the 9th chakra, possibly the 9th and 10th chakra, maybe 9, 10, 11, 12. If there's not a lot of information on all of them, we'll just talk about the 9th, all of them. Because then we have 12 major chakras, so we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Thank you for being my listener. I appreciate you. Thank you for writing your reviews on iTunes. If you have an account, I would really like to get some feedback on iTunes, because that will help get the ball rolling and get more listeners. So thank you in advance. If you feel like doing that, that would be awesome. And remember, I need ghost stories. I'm going to do Metaphysical Ghost Speak, and that's going to be in October on Halloween, October 31st. That show will air. So I'm putting out a call now 6 weeks in advance, so that you guys could get together your best, scariest ghost stories or spookiest paranormal, supernatural happenings. Even if it's UFO related, that's okay too. But the spooky stories that we like to hear in the dark while cuddling under our blankets, eating our popcorn and sipping our hot chocolate. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening this evening, and I will be back tomorrow. And that's all I got to say about that. Signing off now with peace and joy and the high vibes of the holy fifth dimension. Until next time, peace. Metaphysical Soul Speak is run on sponsors and listener support. This means listeners like you. If you are so inclined to support my efforts and my little podcast, please visit me at anchor.fm/metaphysical and pledge an amount of your choosing today. Thank you.